Good morning, everyone. What I want to do is start where we left off last week. Do you remember where we ended the talk last week? Let me see who remembers. This is it. Come on. Come on, where were we? This is where we were. Everybody, throw your hands up. Why are our hands thrown up? Somebody tell me. Because we're on a roller coaster called life. And there's two ways to ride a roller coaster. One is like this, and the other is like this. And we're a church that chooses to throw our hands up. And we were talking about depression, and I was sharing some of my own life experience with us, with the church. And I promised everybody I would do a metaphysical interpretation of a biblical prophet named Elijah. I started to talk a little bit about him last week. The CD is in the bookstore. The service is available on YouTube. And so I'm going to pick up that Elijah, the prophet of Israel, kills all the followers of Baal. And Baal sort of metaphysically represents this outer understanding of God, the old God out there, the God we beg to, the God that changes. And so Jezebel, who's a follower of Baal, sends a message to Elijah. And here's what she says. You know, he gets a text message. And here's what Jezebel tells Elijah. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of the prophets. In other words, I'm going to kill you by tomorrow. It was a death threat. And so Elijah, remember Elijah, metaphysically represents that spirit moving in us. And Elijah's afraid. And what does he do? He runs for his life. Okay? Elijah's afraid, and he takes off running. He runs all over the place. He comes to Judah, and he's even running. He leaves his servant behind. He tells his servant, don't come. And then he himself, all alone, takes a one-day journey into the wilderness. He comes to this point, I guess, where he finds what's called a broom bush. And he sits down under it, and here is Elijah's prayer. He prays that he may die. He's like, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. And it sounds crazy, but we all have that prayer every once in a while. We don't express it, thankfully, but he says this prayer. He lays down under the bush, and he falls asleep. Obviously, what we see in this story is a story of a man going through depression, confusion, feeling hopeless, discouraged, and overwhelmed. And I don't know if you've ever felt any of those feelings. Overwhelmed, hopeless, discouraged, confused, sad, depressed, not knowing. I don't know if you've ever experienced any of that. And so what I share with you is that it happens far more often than we acknowledge. Too often we try and hide. We try and hide, and we try and pretend we're not feeling those feelings. But then there's this virus that shows up, and it catches us off guard. And it just ambushes us. And it says, I'm not going to let you pretend anymore. Many of history's greatest people have struggled with depression. Listen to what this great man said. I am now the most miserable man living. It wasn't me. Don't think it was me. I've never gotten to this point. I've come close, but never gotten. I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were distributed to the whole human family, there would be not one cheerful soul on the earth. That's pretty depressed, huh? You know who said that? Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he suffered for some real depression. I've been reading a lot, and ministers and preachers and teachers suffer from depression. Moses, one day, was like on the mountaintop, and he said the same prayer. He's like, God, just kill me. And this is a metaphor. It's a metaphysical understanding of what we're feeling on the inside and how we're going to relate to it. This was where Elijah was in that day. This was where that Spirit of God, that I am, that early understanding of the Christ inside us was that day. But listen to what happens next. Remember, the metaphors are mine. An angel says, get up and eat. And so he gets up, there was some bread and a little water, and he ate and he drank, and then he laid back down again. Woe is me. And Charles Fillmore says that every time an angel shows up in Scripture, it's a projection into consciousness of a spiritual idea, which is a complicated way of saying it's a God idea. So no matter where we are, no matter what we're feeling, no matter what wilderness we're walking through, no matter what depression we're experiencing, no matter how overwhelmed we feel, if we just stop for a minute, there's a God idea. A God idea. And the angel, the God idea shows up for Elisha, and he ignores it. He goes back into his state of melancholy, lays down, goes to sleep. The angel comes back a second time. The God idea, that's when it's a God idea for us. It keeps coming back. It doesn't take no for an answer, no matter how entrenched we are in our misery. And if we're honest with ourselves, we really entrench ourselves sometimes. We really, put it on. I'm not going to let go of this misery. I'm going to show it. I'm going to walk it. I'm going to talk it. I'm going to, blast it. I'm going to Facebook it every 16 seconds. You know what I'm saying? That happens to all of us. The angel comes back a second time. Not only does he say, get up and eat, but he says there's a journey that is too much for you. For the journey is too much for you. And I could just see he was playing with Elisha's ego. There's a journey, but, you can't do it. And then you can imagine Elijah, yes, I can. Well, you know what the journey was? It was a 40-day walk in the desert. Thank God you don't come to me and pray. And I say, okay, just to go take a 40-day walk in the Everglades. And all your sadness will be healed, okay? And so Elisha gets up, he eats, he drinks, and he walks for 40 days in the desert. Listen to this. He reaches the mountain of God. He reaches the place in his consciousness where he's at the precipice of God. And you know what he does? He goes into a cave. And in this cave, think of what the cave meant. Have you ever been in a cave? A metaphorical cave. You look and it's somebody that wants to cheer you up and you're not answering the phone. You know what I'm saying? People are trying to, let's go out, let's go grab a bite to eat. No, I'm just going to sit here and be miserable. You don't say that. You say, no, I need rest. No, I'm not ready to go out yet. But in code, what you're saying to your Elijah self is, I'm just going to sit here and wallow in my misery. And that's okay to do for a minute. I want you to know that's okay to do for a minute. But the cave, Elijah spends one night in. One night in the cave. I will allow you to wallow one night in misery, okay? And then it's time to do something. The spiritual idea shows up. And there's always a spiritual idea that brings up healing when we follow it. When we follow it. And I want to share something. I want to share something for one to really validate anybody who has or feels real depression. And I'm just not talking about grief. Somebody, we lose somebody, we don't get a job, a relationship breaks up. That's grief. I'm talking about spiritual depression. And I feel it in this house, and I'm called to share upon my own experience with it because I feel it is taking heart. And I want to validate people, and I want people to understand it is really hard for people who have never experienced real clinical depression to understand it. And we know, because if you've never experienced it, if you're an extrovert, see, an introvert turns within to charge themselves. That's the difference. An introvert is, I'm an introvert, and I am not closed-minded or closed-mouthed or quiet. Don't relate introvert with quiet. An extrovert charges with people. So my best friend is an extrovert. When he's worn down, he wants to go to a movie, he wants to go out to eat, he wants to invite 15 people over to watch, you know. When I'm worn down, I want to go in the cave. Extroverts charge in the presence of people, introverts charge in the presence of themselves. And so, when introverts get depressed, they generally cross a boundary that turns their charging into isolation. Okay? And what causes this is stress, personal relationships, conflicts, medical problems, poor diet, poor sleep, trauma, genetic factors, and environment and upbringing. Notice some of these causes are internal, some of these causes are beyond our control. Our environment, our upbringing, our genetics. And then the symptoms are what? We all know somebody that, I'm talking about real spiritual depression here. Persistent sadness, feelings of hopelessness, loss of energy, difficulty concentrating, sleeplessness or sleeping all the time, eating or not eating. I mean, it's different for each person, but I share with you that nobody is exempt from this. Because if you look, it affects all social classes, ages, races, men, women, rich, poor, people who are in committed relationships get depressed, people who are single get depressed, people who have money get depressed, people who don't have money get depressed, older people get depressed, younger people, teenagers. And so there's a common theme that this Elijah story addresses that I want to share and conclude with today. So Elijah is in this place. And I want you to all think that we actually have this place show up sometimes in our life. Now, the one thing I want you to realize is it's unexpected. All right? Usually, this type of sadness ambushes us. Elijah, let me remind you of last week. He just brought rain down to famine. He just brought fire down and proved that the one God, the God that we understand, the indwelling God, is more powerful than all the idol-worshiping gods of Baal. He just did that very day. And then he killed all 450 prophets that worshipped the outside God. You know, like the Santa Claus type God that we all worship sometimes. We negotiate, you know, come on, I'll be good, Santa, you know. Santa baby, you know that song. Just hear Eartha Kitt, you know what I'm saying? And so, this is what the Baal worshipers represent in us. And sometimes we create this separation. And so, Elijah, in the greatest moment of his triumph, I mean, he just basically, you know, hits a home run. You know, he's gotten the miracle of rain to the famine. He's gotten a triumph with the bringing down the fire of God to the one specific spot. He did it by calling upon the name of God and then wiped out all the lesser thoughts, and boom, sadness jumps him. And this is that Jezebel side of our character. Understand, when I'm talking about Elisha and Jezebel and Ahab and Bible characters, they're all an aspect of me. Okay? Don't go into your mind and say, oh, so-and-so, she's that Jezebel in my life. And so-and-so, you know, he's that Ahab in my life. No. Jezebel's in you, Elisha is in you, God is in you, the feelings are in you, and they all mix together in this rich and wonderful way to create this perception of our life. And so Elijah, what he learns, and it's gradual, test by test by test. What Elijah learns is the lesson I want you to learn. We receive God alone and quietly. And sometimes we're so busy that it takes that depressed moment for us to recognize the God who's always present. Sometimes it takes our body or our very spirit and soul, if you will, to ambush us so that we hear the true presence of God. The subject of our study this morning is Elijah, and his story is our story. Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, says, all Scripture is representative. Some of us today, I feel it, are going through something. And it seems as difficult as the thoughts which confronted Elijah's mind. Please realize this whole thing is a battle in the mind. Elijah's all by himself in the wilderness. This story was orally passed down from generation to generation to generation. It's an allegory, it's a legend. There are some true aspects of it, but the important thing for us to realize is there's not a man-like object that we call God sitting at the table with Elijah. He's all by himself with the Lord of his being. Everything that we're discussing is going on inside his mind. And so these prophets of Baal try to convince him that God's power is outside. And he kills them all. This should be a moment of celebration, but right then, the sadness jumps him. Sadness being that Jezebel aspect of our mind. And how does Elijah respond? I'm going to share how he responds from the human side. And then I'm going to share how the indwelling God in him responds to his response. So Elijah's hit with this. He's hit with this. He's sad. He's depressed. And what's the first thing happens? He's gripped by fear and doubt. And he gives into that fear and doubt. Right then in that moment, he forgot that, like in the past, recent past, he's just performed 3 huge miracles. He solved the famine with rain. He brought down the fire of God. And he killed all the lesser prophets. And then, boom, he gives into fear because of one text message that says, I'm going to get you. All right? How many times can one text message just transform our day? Is there any power in the text message? No. Is there really any power in the person? Sometimes maybe they have out of control, but do they have power over what we give into? Fear, doubts. If we give it to them, the answer is yes. And I know this is a journey, church. I've been walking this path, for 3-4 months now. And I just give it to God, give it to God, give it to God. And after a while, that becomes habitual. But at the first, you really need to set a determination that there is no spot where God is not. And when you catch yourself in that fear and in your doubt, we'll see what not to do. The second thing that Elijah did is he reacted impulsively. The text says he ran all over the place. I mean, he's running all over Judah to Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem, to Beersheba. He's all over the place. He's running so scared, and you know what? He's going nowhere. Did you ever in your mind have a problem show up and just run rampant in your mind? Anybody? Anybody ever just like try and figure it out, and you're just running in circles and there's no answer. And what if I do this, and I'm going to go and get this one, and no, I need to do this one. No, I got to do this one. No, I got to move the piano here. No, and you're just like playing musical chairs, jumping up and down in your head. Where are you going? Nowhere. Because you're not doing anything. You know what you're doing? You're freaking yourself out. You're freaking yourself out, and when we freak ourselves out, you know whose voice we don't hear? God. Third thing he does. So he's gripped by fear, he's gripped by doubt, He's running all over the place. He's freaking himself out. Third, he isolates himself. And this is the danger when you're introverted. The one thing we need most when we're feeling overwhelmed is at least one safe person to let them know what's going on. And so Elijah doesn't even take his servant. He leaves his servant behind and then walks another day where into the wilderness. You know what the wilderness represents? It represents confusion in our mind. And this means one of the advice is at least share how we are feeling with some safe people. Don't post it on Facebook. You know, don't like tweet it all over the world. But sometimes we need to let one person know, I feel overwhelmed. I feel sad. I feel alone. I feel empty. I feel attacked. I feel hopeless. I feel discouraged. These are all feelings. Don't look at me. I'll come down there off this seat, Catherine. I see you looking at me. Come on here. Come on, you want to hit me? She's choking in the second row, but that's okay, because we love each other. She's one of my safe people. And so, sharing does something. It lets us know somebody else is there with us. Because that imagination, that sick imagination, plays tricks with us. The power of the imagination is so glorious when we use it for God purposes and God ideas, and it is so destructive when you're under a cloud of depression. It will lie to you, trick you, and break your very will. And the fourth thing is the product of the first three. Because he allowed fear and doubt to take hold, and because he ran around like a crazy person impulsively, and combine that with isolating himself, and then the fourth thing is dark thoughts took control of his mind. So if you want dark thoughts, darkness, misery to take control of your mind, here is the formula. Add fear, doubt, run around crazy, and isolate yourself. 1 + 2 + 3 equals darkness in your mind. I mean, let me ask you, have you ever felt this way where you've just screamed inside of yourself, my God, I've had enough, I can't go on. My God, I can't take this anymore. My God, you know, I can't even cope anymore. This happens to all of us. And when it does, I'm here to share with you today, there is a spiritual idea. There is a God idea when we're quiet enough to hear it. There is a God idea when we're willing to look for it. The answer lies in willingness. All healing on any level, especially spiritual healing, always begins with willingness. Once we admit we're not willing, no, I'm not willing, then willingness shows up. But we need to take that brave admission and say, no, you know, I am willing or I'm not willing. We need to recognize and to be with the feeling no matter how long it takes. Because I will tell you, when we're with the feeling, we recognize there's always something we can do. There's always something, whether it's unemployment, whether it's financial, whether it's health, whether it's relationships, whether it's people, places, or things. There's always something, however so slight, however so insignificant, that we can do that doesn't rely on the other person. So let's look how the indwelling God dealt with Elijah's mindset. Remember, depression is a mindset. It's not a noun. It's not a person, place, or thing. You can't touch it. We can't break it up into a million pieces. We can't burn it, physically. It's a mindset. And so number one, what we need when we're feeling this way are two things, and you'll recognize me in this. We need rest and we need food. Okay, listen to what the Bible says. Elijah sat under the tree, so discouraged, he prayed that he may die. He fell asleep. Here's a profound truth when God shows up in our life. He wakes up and there's some bread baking on coals and there's a jar of water. Sometimes when we're feeling down, we just need to eat and sleep. Sometimes it's more important that we just take, these represent taking care of ourselves. They represent we need to take care of ourselves physically even more than we need to pray. Don't try and be so spiritual in the moment. Just try and be physical. Try and be a human being. And let go of needing to do anything. There's a time for crying out to God. There's a time also to just roll over the bed, pull the sheets over your head, close your eyes, and get a good night's sleep. Literally, this Thursday, I slept 18 hours on and off. But you saw last week, I got home at 1:30. I have never stopped this whole week. I talked to Tim, and Tim basically gave me an ultimatum. You are going to take 2 days off. You know, or else. And I don't know what or else I said. I didn't want to find out what it was. Right? I didn't want to, when Tim said 2 days off, that was the first time I've had 2 days off, probably in 45 days. And then, I got to tell you, there's a time when we just need some sushi and a chocolate milkshake. Next time you're depressed, if you don't eat sushi, eat fish. If you don't eat fish, eat steak. But next time you're depressed, take your favorite food and have a milkshake with it. Trust me, we need to take care of ourselves physically. It may mean going to the beach. It may mean listening to music, watching a movie. It may mean sitting in a comfortable chair and doing nothing. Whatever it is, what it means is forget the problem for 5 minutes. Turn off the monkey mind, the chatter in our head that incessantly drives us crazy as if we have the power to heal and transform and change everybody and everything. Number one is physical care. Number 2 is we have to face our fears. We have to face our fears. God calls out. He's in the cave. He got the 40 days. He went through the journey. And then he goes right back into depression. Just grabs hold of that misery again. And he's in the cave and God calls out, Elijah, what are you doing? And that's a good question. What he's really saying, Elijah, it's time to face your fears. There was a moment in time where Elijah was sitting there feeling sorry for himself in that cave. Oh, the Israelites, and I did everything for them, and they don't love me, and they're trying to kill me, and what am I going to do? And I'm just going to sit in this cave and pout. And you know what God says? Self-pity doesn't work, bro. You can sit and feel it for a minute or two, but I want you to learn that self-pity and victimization of ourselves is an opponent to all spiritual growth. It always opposes spiritual growth. It feels good for a minute. Remember, we can sit in the cave one night, but the next day, it's just the opposition of all spiritual growth. And so relaxation, what does it do? Food, rest, speaks to my body, right? Facing my fears and relieving myself of that victim, consciousness, the self-pity, what does it do? It speaks to my mind. We have body, we have mind, now we need a new vision. There is a vision each one of us has in our spirit. In this story, God said, go out and anoint 3 more people. He sent him on a new mission. Elijah was not allowed to wallow in self-pity anymore. God turns to him in that cave, within him, the indwelling God, and says, come on with me, get up, get out of your cave, come on, I want to show you something. I want to show you something. And he goes out and he hears the wind, but God's not in the wind. See, too often we expect this big God to show up and shake up the whole problem and fix it for us. And then there's an earthquake, but God's not in the earthquake. Then there's a huge fire, and God's not in the fire. This is Elijah looking out of the cave. And God shows up in that still, small voice. And as soon as he heard that still, small voice, he recognized it was God. He recognized the lesson. And the lesson I want to share with you today is it's not a crime to be discouraged. It's not a sin, or it's not wrong to feel depressed. It's what we do when this feeling of hopelessness takes us that what matters. It's what we do that matters. Remember, God is quietly here within us. I want to be honest with each one of us. Brokenheartedness, people breaking our heart, people letting us down. It's a fact of life. We do it to people and they do it to us. It's never intentional. It's because we all live in our own personal little movie. And we're the director and we're the producer. And too often we don't come together and co-produce the movie. I'm living in mine and she's living in hers. And so brokenheartedness at times is a fact of life. Don't try and escape it. Don't repress it. Don't end up in cynicism. God is never a cynic. I need to tell you that the real church must teach its members today that crucifixions are a fact of life. That failure at times, not meeting our own goals and expectations, church, they're a fact of life. Too often we think that our message and people and teachers and psychologists and motivational speakers tell us, they condition us for success, and that's a great thing. But I don't know where it was written that we're only entitled to fulfillment in every person, place, and thing in our life. It's when trials and burdens of my life showed up that have taught me the character of the man I am today. I believe the church must stand here today and tell everybody that God is in Good Friday as much as God is in Easter. God is in those moments in our life where we feel like we're metaphorically nailed to a cross, in the same moments that God has worked miracles in every one of our life and risen us above, unsurmountable obstacles. And so failure and disappointment is as much a fact as life as achievement and success. And I believe the church today must teach us all to not label them and accept our burdens, to take our grief and to be like David, to look at the grief, to not deny it and blame somebody else for it and make excuses, to look at our own personal grief and like David say, yea, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I walk through it. And to ask that question, how can I transform this liability into an asset? How can I see God in this very moment? There is no outer God that says, I'm going to escape this tension. I can beg and scream and moan and groan and cry and yell to some God out there. He or she doesn't exist. There is no God that ever told me that I'm going to escape all disappointment in my life. There is no God that ever told me I always have to get my own way all the time in every situation. Knowing God is a mature spiritual relationship which recognize we're not going to escape trials sometimes. So as I conclude, I want to conclude with what I believe true religion says. True religion says if we have faith in God, God is the power that gives us balance through depression, through discouragement, through unforeseen tragedies. God is the power in us that balances us so we don't fly off the handle, run around like a crazy man or a woman. God is that voice inside of us that says, let your heart not be troubled. That if you believe in God, believe also in me. There's a God within us that always says, come unto me, all that labor and are heavy laden. Whatever the situation is, there is an indwelling spirit in us. And it says, come up to me every thought that scares you. Come up to me every idea that frustrates you. Come to me all those clouds of anxiety floating in your mental skies. Come to me when you feel broken. Come to me and I will give you rest. And the rest that God is a rest that passes all understanding. And so that I can't teach you. Only you can be willing and receive it. God bless you. Amen. So it is. God bless you. God bless you. Amen.